In my previous lecture, we discussed about different forms of organization and we linked organizing as an important function of management. We also covered planning and management by objectives. These are all aiming towards achievement of the organizational goal, and management meant basically a productive function, always concerned with profitability, efficiency and productivity. So, today we will look at organizing in more details. Specifically, at the end of this lecture, you should be able to understand the types of organizations, know and understand the concept of departmentation. Also, you should understand the concept of organizational charts. We will look into each of these things in detail and see how this has evolved over a period of time. We will also critically assess how new forms of organizations are coming to enable the business and how organizing is a critical aspect of any management function. If you see the types of organizations, as we looked at earlier, the forms of organization could be entrepreneurial, it could be cooperative, it could be a private limited company, it could be a public limited company, closely held system. So, there could be different forms of ownership and there are different forms of distribution of wealth when you create an organization. But when we see organizing as a specific element, we will also see what could be the different types of organization based on how have we arranged the task, how is the reporting relationship between one level and the other, and also how we create vertical and horizontal distribution when several people are engaged in achievement of the task. So, when we look at that, so you get three forms of organization. One is line, military or scalar organization, another is functional organization, and the third is line and staff organization. These three forms of organizations have been recognized primarily over the period of time. So, it has some historical bearing and also the different institutions which came into existence at different periods of history, but all of these are of the history of last 80-90 years. So, initially if you see the line and military or scalar kind of an organization was the simplest form of putting people together. That means it is the one person reported to the next level and next person reported to the next level, so that up to the highest level or to the CEO level or at the commander level or whatever. So, that means one person reported to one boss, and now the boss had set of people to supervise, and it is typically the olden days of military organization. So, military organization and the line organization has been used synonymously in many texts. So, it is direct and people at different levels know whom they are accountable to. So, very clearly they know who the boss is, from whom they should get instruction to, whose objectives they are trying to meet. So, the boss's objectives and the organizational objectives were not too different and very clearly they were accountable for. So, in that kind of a situation, there was a great clarity with respect to the boss to whom he is responsible for and the subordinates to whom they are reporting to. So, this form of organization exists till today. It is simple, it is easy to understand, and it is also flexible. You can always add few more people and you can create different lines depending upon the kind of task to be achieved. Point is the division of authority is very clear. How many levels, how many layers was very clear in a military kind of an organization. So, you will see a simple one below the other. So, that means you have a senior manager, below I am a manager, below I am an assistant manager, and the manager, the supervisor and the worker. So, you could relate organizational hierarchy from one to the other, very clear channel of communication, and according to many no confusion at all, because people knew exactly from whom they are supposed to take the order and what is that they should deliver and whom they should satisfy. All these things got defined very clearly in a line kind of a system. So, it is strong in discipline as it fixes the responsibility on an individual. So, individual cannot say that I got orders from many people, or I have to oblige many people, or I have to consolidate views of too many people. No such things. Very clearly the boss articulated the organizational requirements, define what is to be done, how should that be done, and then he also made the other person accountable too for whatever he asked for. So, it is in that kind of a situation, it is straightforward, simple and executable. But the system could work very well when the number of layers in the organization was small. That means, if it was very great and perfect for a smaller entrepreneurial, or what we say the trader single owner kind of a system, it was very easy because not too many layers, size of the organization was not too big, very small, and 3 to 4 layers, the system worked pretty well. But when you see a complex organization, or where there are too many functions and too many layers, too many levels in the organization, that time people had to go through their bosses. So, in other words, if you think of an hierarchy where there is a supervisor, there is an assistant manager, there is a manager, a senior manager and a general manager, and if two colleagues had a problem at the lowest level, then one had to report from one level to the other to the 4 levels up, and then the instruction has to come down 4 levels down to solve a problem between the two individuals at the 5th or 6th or the 8th level in the organizational hierarchy. So, that was the kind of a problem where the difficulty of communication and the time it used to take, because you had to go up the line and then come back. So, another thing is that if there are some expert who is thinking that something is not happening, like specialists in the area of human resource management, or in the area of finance, or in the area of accounts, or accounting, or the tax, or the law, any of these things, when they have to give the advice, then the advice of these people were not taken seriously into consideration, because you are basically responsible to your next person, and obliging him, pleasing him, following the orders of the superior became more critical and more important than integrating the specialist view. And that is how the line organization did not exploit the views of the specialist. And the senior people, when they had to have 3 or 4 subordinates, each subordinate created their own line down below them. Then what would happen? So, that is, several of them will have 4 or 5 next level, another. So, when you see this hierarchical line organization, senior people became really overburdened, because too many things they have to clear at their level, particularly when it has a policy implications. Overburdening of the executives at the senior level was a kind of a very common issue, and it was fine for a limited to very small concerns, and sometimes it also provided the dictatorial kind of management, because they had that complete control over the organization and their lower level subordinates, and the problems 2, 3, 4 lines down below were, it was not reaching the highest level at all. So, that means they were not grounded in the realities. So, they were pretty away from the realities. When the next level subordinates, when they created a vacuum or a barrier to communication, that time the bosses thought whatever they are doing is right, and they continue to do, and one day they had to face set of surprises, because they were not grounded in the reality. So, the dictatorial way of working is another disadvantage of line organization, which can develop as a dysfunctional consequence over a period of time. So, when you see the application of line organization, Definitely it is suitable for all concerns, particularly small concerns, free from complexities. So, if they are not facing a turbulent kind of a situation, they are not seeing demands of the customer changing from one point to the other, or they are delivering standard goods and services, line organizations was fine, because there was no uncertainties, no unpredictabilities, things were standardized, things were routine, and the line organization was the best suited form of organization. Automatic and continuous process industries such as paper, sugar, textile industries, you name it. Several industries had this kind of a line organization, basically because it provided that required reporting relationships, provided the clarity, howsoever the length, the complexity of the relationship was of the line, but they were able to handle several of the organizational decision making situations. But as we are seeing the line organization, but people also started seeing another possibility, particularly F. W. Taylor suggested another form of organization still known as a functional organization, because it was difficult to find all round persons qualified to work at middle management levels in the line organization. That means the line person had to be specialist, generalist, should know all different functions within the organization. So, then they started introducing the aspect of functional organization, means different functions like could be marketing, finance, human resource, manufacturing, operations, materials. So, different functions of management were distributed at different levels. Earlier days, particularly the Taylor days, the foreman was considered as the critical thing, or what we call today the general managers. So, the organization chart consisted of, particularly in a functional organization, so you will find that from chief executive the area gets distributed, and different heads in the area of manufacturing, could be in the area of planning, it could be in the area of R&D management, it could be marketing, purchasing. So, various functions got distributed. So, typically then a manufacturing organization had the departments like operations, then personnel and administration, then sales and marketing, and then finance and accounts. So, these were typically the kind of functionality which has to be there for any organization to be successful. So, the functional organization gave way to very clearly that you are able to appoint somebody who also knows that particular domain knowledge. So, this domain knowledge, discipline knowledge enabled, and there we saw in the functional organization role for specialist. So, specialist is they were good at the technology of the organization, the services of the organization, but along with that they also brought their own domain understanding, domain knowledge. So, the expert was able to give advice to the workers. For example, in those days industrial engineers were giving advice to the workers how to have more efficient and productive systems of practices at the workplace. And similarly, at a later point of time, the expert in the area of finance was able to see how to manage the funds, how to invest, and how to look at the resources, particularly the financial resources. So, it relieves line executives of routine but specialized decisions. So, the specialized decisions which they were not aware of, which demanded understanding of the markets, which demanded understanding of the technology, which demanded a specialized methods of calculations. So, these were not part of any the line fellows, line managers, but it was given to the specialized the specialist. So, the expert guidance reduces the number of things in the organization, particularly the negative consequences of decision making. It reduced accidents, it reduced the wastage of materials, it helped efficient production systems and practices, better plant layout and things like that. So, as we were seeing that the functional organization brought that the the new forms of systems where you have to blend the specialist role into the organizational requirements. But the quality of work certainly improved in the specialization, where people were able to perform different functional roles. But these functional roles also led to the issues of coordination, which we will see later on when we discuss various dimensions of coordination. But the functional specialists, they started saying that who is making profit to the company? Is operations is more important? Is finance is more important? Is marketing more important? So that each one of them could describe themselves as the organization, and they are the one to make the basic difference in terms of profitability, growth, productivity. So we could see in many organizations, functional specialists were running into conflict, were claiming their superiority over the other. It also led to the power struggle and the competition between the functional specialists became unhealthy. So in that sense, the functional organization was giving way, and always they were merging themselves into a kind of a line form where they wanted a direction, they wanted to have their responsibilities and scope of work defined by one rather than the scope of the function itself. So the functional organization, it was difficult to fix up the responsibility for any manager, any foreman, particularly when things went wrong, because they were always dependent on other functions. So an obsolete machinery meant that there was no finance available, but the finance person would say that we don't have enough order booking, and the sales guy could say that we don't have good quality of manufacturing, and manufacturing person could say, look, our people are very indisciplined, they are not there at the workplace at the proper time, and so and so forth. So in other words, in a functional organization, people could blame each other, and it was so difficult for somebody to fix their scope of action and fix the responsibility. And at some point of time at the workers level, there used to be confusion, because when they have to ask for resources, when they have to see who to take the guidance, at some point of time who was having more authority, because you wanted certain things, your boss has approved, but somebody else would say finance is not available, or you have the finance, but your materials guy would say that I can't follow a proper procedure, and wait a minute or wait for years. So the question of that the interdependencies were not managed very effectively as the organization started growing and the functionality got defined into various specialities and specialization in the organizational form. So if we continue to look at how the functional organization gave way, the relationship was very complex as the specialists started getting into unhealthy competition, and then so they were not given opportunities, because where people could take initiatives, people can have ingenuity, then where people could have the drive, but they were all bound by the kind of specialization, kind of functionality, and their skills could not be transferred from one area to the other in a very comfortable fashion. And this is the time where we started seeing a form of organization today, or still today, called as the line and staff organization. So the specialist roles are basically to enable the line function to perform, and so the organization structure would have very clearly the people who are into main or core of the organization, and there are several others who are called as the staff or the support functions or enabling kind of a function. So many a times you also would have a pure line organization, pure staff organization, or a kind of a line and staff organization, or within the staff you could also have line. So all these combinations started emerging, as we started seeing a merger of a pure line organization and pure functional organization and a combination of these things. So, the developments can be seen from the Taylor's time, but the supervisory authority and control over the work of their subordinates was there with the bosses, but the bosses also were accountable for not only to their bosses, but also to the the staff specialist. So, the human resource HR was a specialist function, the audit and accounts was a kind of a specialist function. So, you could see many of these staff functions within the organization, but there is also the line which was basically responsible for operations, manufacturing or service. So, these were considered as core and the staff as enabling. But as you are seeing, the staff executives relieved many of their line managers' preparation. Then these people worked as advisors to them, and many a times the question came who should refer, who should ask for. That is, the staff would go and ask in a proactive way, what is your problem, can I do something for you, or line people should go and ask the staff, I have this problem, what is that you can do for me. So, many a times when these kinds of initiatives were not there, staff were sitting in one corner, but they were underutilized. The early stage of 50s and 60s where some of the R&D specialists were employed. So, they were waiting that line people or the shop floor people would come and ask for solution, whereas the shop floor people were expecting that we have an R&D director or a specialist who would come and solve their problems, but they were all looking for initiatives to be taken by the other, but they could not meet and discuss. And so, you saw these specialist roles sometimes were becoming redundant, or particularly when they were not taking the required initiatives. So, to accept or implement the recommendation of the staff clearly was left to the line person or the hands of the line executive. So, it was not an effort to take away the authority of the line person, authority or the scope of action of the line person, but the specialist existed to advise, to help, to enable. But these roles also got either misused or new role definitions took place, where the staff specialist started controlling the line people. So, the staff role was a kind of a rule making, and then they expected the line people to be a kind of a to have that kind of a rule enforced behaviors. So, these times were creating a kind of a line versus staff conflicts. Who is important, who is more relevant. So, such situations definitely left to the redefinition of the role of the line people as well as the role of the staff people. But typically the line and staff organization, you can see that the legal advisor exercised an indirect influence on the other people. So, particularly you will see that there is an indirect influence is shown in terms of this dotted lines, and whereas the straight hard lines are shown where they are directly reporting and they are accountable for. So, this line and staff, if you will see, there are many obvious advantages. So, expert advice from specialists, staff executives was made use of. Then definitely there was a wastage of material, man and machine hours, because of the line people were able to focus on, and whenever they had any problems they could seek the advice of legal, human resource and other functional specialists. And the such focus also brought more discipline, more tightening of the focused work in the organization, but the conflict always was less and minimal when the organization was at a medium growth level. Quality improved, and there was no confusion like in the functional organization, because specialist role was specialist role, whereas the line roles were the line. So it is in that sense, one was advisory, one was execution, one was focused on the day-to-day routine tasks, and they were making decisions, but decision maker always could seek the advice of the expert, advice of the staff members. So the line and staff organization possessed practically all the advantages of both of the line as well as functional organization. It was a kind of an organic evolution. But as I was telling you that the who should bear the staff expenses. So the line people were saying the staff people as overheads, they are not really required. So this was one kind of a view. So the staff people were always criticized for their roles as they are really not required within the organization. So the roles were seen as overheads. And similarly, sometimes where the authority were to be exercised more by the staff people, so the line people were becoming more and more agitated, but in terms of what is their function, what is that they are responsible for. More so frictions and jealousies, when it was developed too much, then they could in fact, instead of enabling, they were becoming blocks, they were causing delays, they were causing for file movements, they were not really helping people to do the faster decision making. In fact, they would ask more questions and stop faster and efficient decision making, which the line organization was known for. So the specialist role, the staff role became a kind of non-enabling, stifling in some of the situations, and so the line and staff conflict was not easy to deal with. But it is very common in medium and large enterprises, and typically the 80 to 90% of the organizations represent even today the line and staff organization. We also see this contributing to many other forms of organization. We must see sometimes the organizations are based on geographically distributed, sometimes it is product wise distributed, sometimes we also see the organizations are distributed depending upon the kind of markets which they are serving. So we do see a lot of differentiation and sometimes the integration. Most of the staff functions got integrated and the line work got distributed. So when that was the case, most of the staff functions moved to the corporate world, or what is called as the corporate office. So the corporate office and the other divisions, or the divisions at different local levels. So it used to be a kind of a conflict, because all the staff functions were put into the corporate functions. So the conflict between the staff and line also resulted in many organizations, like the top management versus the other senior and middle management people, or it is the corporate versus other functionaries or other divisional heads. So these kinds of conflicts, these kinds of issues made this line and staff organization to have more and more dysfunctional consequences. Dysfunctional consequences essentially in terms of rigidity, inflexibility, slow response time, and not having concern to the technology, to the market, to the speed or to efficiency. So we will see how some of these things are affected and how these things can be overcome as we go along as a part of leadership, coordination and other functions of management. However, by design we got some of these issues. But our discussion of line and staff is incomplete unless we spend little more time on departmentation. When you see the departmentation, or it is also called as the specialization, then we can appreciate few more problems of the organization design. Departmentation is a process of dividing a large monolithic functional organization into small and flexible administrative units. So, this is a kind of a broad definition, but what we are seeing is that departmentation is a process of division of set of functions into its specialized whole, so that we can divide. So, the division of labor is the fundamental of the departmentation. As we are seeing the organization design, one of the principles is the division of labor, and division of labor leads to the specialist functions, and that leads to the departmentation. So, grouping of similar activities of a business concern into small units for the purpose of facilitating administration. So, the grouping and the regrouping of the activities under each of the function and functional specialization, you see a complex kind of an organization coming in with several of the departments. Let us make it things more simpler. So, you look at manufacturing. So, the manufacturing would have what? So, you would have materials, then you have maintenance. So, then if you look at maintenance, it can be further divided into two groups, one preventive maintenance, another is could be breakdown maintenance. So, and if you see human resource management, so within that human resource management you will have a department which is focusing on recruitment, another focusing on compensation, another focusing on the union management relationship, another focusing on the welfare. So, the departments represented a specialist focus of each of these functional subunits. So, it helped to see who is focusing on that particular aspect or particular dimension. So, the method of departmentation was such that it enabled the benefit of specialization. So, the department always represented this, departmentation represented the specialization. Department give that kind of an identity which that particular group of people is supposed to focus on and deliver a value to the particular division and to the organization. So, if you see the benefits are several. So, it secured the total effort required to be undertaken by the enterprise now into function and sub-functions. So, you are able to see the kind of preparation required. Today we are also using this word, what is known as competencies. So, as you are seeing divisions, you are seeing departments, within the departments you are seeing sub-departments, then we are also seeing how to get the best person in the sub-departments, what kind of preparations, what kind of educational and experiential exposure one need to have to fulfill those positional requirements. These are all today what has contributed to the field of competency mapping and the competency framework. So, it also the specialization and the departmentation also helped in terms of the coordination. So, in several departments were part of the organization, and then the departments also were required to coordinate, and unless you coordinate different departments, you could not have achieved the enterprise objectives very successfully. So, that means you created several departments, but these departments were part of an organic whole. So, the starting point was the goals, the missions, the vision of the organization, and then we created several objectives. The objectives could be seen in terms of several tasks, duties and responsibilities to be performed. So, the duties, responsibilities, the task and the activities were regrouped to achieve what is required. So, the departments gave that name and the symbol to represent that particular set of functions, set of tasks, set of jobs. So, the regrouping and grouping of various activities led to a final definition of departments and the specializations within each of these departments. So, the departmentation also provided not only a scope for coordination, but also the control. So, now very clearly you know which department is responsible for. So, we do not have to see a left or right in the organization, but very clearly you are able to see who is the person, which department is to focus on. So, it helps the control function. Very efficiently you are able to see who the which group is responsible for. Departmentation fundamentally also should provide for this, right, effective controls, effective control of various activities and effective coordination. So, not only coordination and control, but also the economy. So, you cannot create a superfluous, unnecessary, unwanted departments. So, then there is not much of a scope for action. When there is no scope for action in a positive way, they may also become very redundant, or they may become negative players in the organizational functioning. So, another important fundamental principle is to make sure that the necessity of such specialization. Then it should not create an excessive burden for the organization. If it creates a financial burden by having too many specialized and specialist roles, too many departments, then organizations will have to pay much more, because at senior level or at a mid level you may have many departments, but they do not have that role to perform, and that is the time where the organization will spend unnecessary money to keep positions and also to route many of the files and papers through various departments which really not concerned about what is required or what is to be done. So, such situations need to be avoided. So, one need to make a judgment whether such positions are required or not, and what is the value add which brings to the table. So, the departmentation, when you look at it, you need to really do some kind of a groundwork. Groundwork in the sense, we can also call it as homework or that basic analysis. So, before the management decides on any scheme of departmentation, it should make certain preparations and prepare the ground. It should not be done on whims and fancies. It should not be done to meet the individual objectives, because somebody is there. So, you do not have a position then to create a department just to create a route for a particular person. I think that is the wrong way of creating departments. But in many organizations we do see such things are happening. So, you may create a position at a vice president level, but with a designation called vice president gardening, when gardening is required or not. So, if you create such positions, then really it is waste of effort, waste of time, waste of resources. So, it is important to keep tab of the creation of the specialization, creation of the departments. But the departments can be created, as we talked about earlier, based on the functions of the organization. So, the activities of the organizations are divided into the primary functions, and the primary functions are manufacturing or operations, marketing, engineering, research and development, employee relations, human resource management, finance. So, the various departments, these becomes very primary functional departments, and within that functional departments you can have several of the sub functions. So, one way of creating departments is to first define various functions and then identify various sub functions within that. The next way of seeing the organizational structure is also by product. So, this type has become increasingly important, and as you see, the larger complex organizations have several products. It is products in the sense, if you see a consumer product company like LG or Samsung or BPL, any of these companies, right. So, they would have AC, then they would have fridge, they would have TV, then they have washing machines. So, there are different products. So, some products range could be homogeneous, that is within which you will see several varieties, but in many it could be very highly differentiated kind of a product line. So, you will have in this organization a person in charge for TV, somebody is in charge of AC, air conditioning, somebody is in charge of TVs, somebody is in charge of audio, video, cameras, and so each of these things will become a kind of a separate product line, and then within that you will see the specialist functions coming in. So, the product based organizations are very clearly whether it is related to or where you can group some of the things or you can't. So, each of the product would represent a particular sub organization itself. Within that you can also have different functions. So, that means you each unit, each manufacturing unit of that particular product is headed by a product specialist or person who is in charge of that product, but within that you can also see the subunits. Some of the time you can also see the primary departmentation may be coming because of the territory. So, the easiest classification is urban and rural. So, somebody is addressing the urban market, somebody is addressing the rural markets. But it can also be seen what you have seen in the banking sector, right. So, there is a rural banking is seen as much different from the urban banking. So, similarly you will see the south, north, east and west kind of a regional distribution, and then people are addressing the specific markets and the requirements of that each of the territory. It is also possible, so within the segments that within a particular region, the certain areas where people with high income group live and certain areas your middle income group would live. Similarly, some areas lower income people are involved. So, when you are addressing this territory, it may represent different economic strata, different demographic preferences. So, you are trying to create organization departments to meet some of those specific representation of each of these territories. So, the salesperson in each territory reports to the regional or territorial manager, who in turn communicates with the other sales manager. So, the organization is created based on that. Also, you can create organizational departments based on the process what they follow. The manufacturing of activities could be divided into various processes. So, you will find always in manufacturing it could be the assembly, but before that assembly then somebody is preparing different components. So, some minor components, the major components, mechanical components, electronic components, or you can also see mechanical then electrical. So, it could see that by process could be the various, but then also there is could be a painting shop, there could be punching and the processing of this in terms of the milling and various operations which are conducted at the shop floor level. So, that is the time where the organization gets defined by the process. Where do we start this operation? Where is that initial, if particularly in a machine building company, where the sheet metal work is done? Where is this the surface gets finished? Where is that you treat this surface with different chemicals? Where is fine finishing is coming? So, the process defines and finally to the assembly thing. So, the process of production which you can see defines various departments. So, particularly it is okay when you are taking a kind of a mass production or the where volumes are given more importance. The organization whatever may be the focus of the departmentation, right, the departmentation becomes by per se is very important. You cannot make or create an organization where everybody does everything at all levels it is a very desirable thing, but you can't achieve that kind of a situation where you can't make everybody to be perfect in every function. So, the departmentation is a need, also it has its importance, and one need to make a choice in terms of which method of departmentation they would go, rather than they cannot say that we will avoid the departmentation altogether. So, it increases the operating skills and efficiency of the organization, no doubt about it. It is very obvious. It involves division of function and the fixation of responsibilities. So, as you see, it should be organic, it should be whole, then it is based on a detailed assessment of activities and a relationship of one activity to the other, and then you are able to arrange it in a manner which is very functional or requirement of the organization. So, if the core is product, if the core is territory, if the core is the completion of various processes, then accordingly you need to create the required departments. So, it not only fixes the responsibilities, but it also helps the executives to be seeing what is that they need to acquire, what is that they are addressing, and they want to address it in more efficient, in an effective manner. So, then within that you will see the powers are allocated, authority is delegated. So, it makes it much more efficient. So, it increases the prestige, and also it increases the skills of the managers. So, they are able to identify that I am like this and these are the activities I have done, and I can do these things in a superior fashion. I think all these things will also provide opportunities for what we call it as a career planning and career growth. So, the individuals can identify steps for themselves, how they are growing within the organization and where do they belong. So, that also gives that required identity as a part of the career management. And so, the departmental managers, they become more efficient as they identify, as they develop themselves to meet the requirements of the organization. Similarly, it gives scope for expanding the organization to an indefinite degree, because now you can see, keep on looking at what departments to add, how do you see the what we call it as the horizontal differentiation. The departmentation is nothing but it is the horizontal expansion of the organization into various specific activities and regrouping of the activities. So, it particularly it facilitates budget preparation, effective control of expenditure, attaining specialization and better coordination among the managerial person, because the coordination comes because you know who the person is responsible for, what they are supposed to do and whom they are accountable for, both in terms of the superior bosses and also to the next departments to which they are influencing and they are contributing to. So, the departmentation, if you see very clearly, to create manageable units. So, you keep on grouping and regrouping set of activities, so that it gives that meaningful whole to control, to coordinate and to fix the responsibilities and to delegate authority. And as we are creating these departments, it also brings that specialization. As people performing, as people are contributing in one particular area, it is also going to contribute for maturity. As they mature, they would see several of the situations. They also could see various contingencies. They can form better rules, they can respond to things in a better manner. And certainly fixing the responsibilities of the heads of various departments, because now you can link the departmental goals to the overall requirements, goals of the organization, and each departmental heads could see what is that they need to do to meet the objectives of the organization. So, the In other words, the departmentation is a major block, in the sense the major unit of definition and design of any organization chart, and that is how the organization chart is the result of organization design, and departmentation is the key of this organization design. So, it defines, portrays the structural relationship between different functions, the position of the people in the enterprise who are responsible for these functions. So, organization chart is nothing but a graphical representation of the departments and the reporting relationship between various departments and indicating who is accountable for whom. So, it shows how the activities of a concern are coordinated into a working unit. Organization chart, which is also known as organization tree, is nothing but a map or a drawing of the organization. So, it represents the departments, it represents the relationship, it represents the reporting things what we have seen earlier. So, it indicates the interrelationship and relative positions of each department in the organizational hierarchy. So, the lines of command that also indicates the authority and the responsibilities. So, the relationship between different managers, at whether they are at the same level or at the different level. Similarly, departments at the same level or at different levels can also be viewed by seeing this organizational chart. So, you can also indicate sometimes how many of these managers are supervising how many people, that is the names of the managers and the number of persons whom they are supervising or responsible for can also be represented in the organizational chart. And the managerial relationship, sometimes you are directly influencing some other groups, sometimes they are also reporting to you, but they can also be accountable for some other function. So, you can represent through dotted or direct or indirect kind of a relationship. So, sometimes you can also see the illogical grouping of functions, sometimes the statistics department, where it should be in operations, or it should be in finance, or it should be somewhere else. So, one can see where to put some of these departments, which are the whom they should be reporting to. So, one can omit, one can pinpoint these omissions of a particular function. You may see, I think we do not have such a department within the company. So, the recently somebody was identifying, we do not have somebody who can respond to the public. So, then you have to have an authority within the organization who will address and respond to the questions of the public. So, the new departments could get created. So, when you see the sample organizational chart, it is typically represents. So, as you can see very clearly, in this there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So, there are 8 major heads or major group. So, without even going into the details, you can visualize, and then you can also see who the persons are, what do they responsible for, what do they do, is one or many, all these things can be viewed graphically. So, advantages of organizational chart tells quickly who is responsible for a particular function and also pinpoints the weaknesses of the organization. And information contained in the organization chart supplements the details available in organizational manual. So, you can also, so if you want to see what are the duties and responsibilities, what that individual should do or should not do, can be explored further by seeing what is the kind of authorities they have, what is the scope of work and things like that. And many a times it is a good device for people who are joining the organization to give the complete picture of the organization and show where do they belong and also what level they have been inducted into the organization, help them to guide from the day one. And you can also see how the previous arrangements was and what the current arrangements are. You can also project it to the future to map the changes of the organization and also help people to see where the future is going to come. But the limitations of organizational chart very clearly is the problem of updating. In many situations the charts are something, but in reality something else could be happening because of the changes and lack of the updation of the organizational chart. But it also gives a kind of a static picture of a dynamic business. That is what people say. So, the undercurrents could be many. The what is not represented in the organizational chart is the kind of informal relationship what people have within the organization, and you can't put all of these human relationships to an organizational chart, and that too in its all details and difficulties. So, you see sometimes the structural rigidity also in what induces what people call it as the red tape, because they would insist that you must follow this route, you must follow all the steps of the hierarchy to reach particular decision making. So, in other words, decision making gets affected when you have too many complex reporting relationships, too many dotted lines, and too many departments with different degrees of specializations are combined, and that is where the organization charts shows definitely the information and communication channels, but can also represent several of the complexities. And the advantages of the organizational chart, as we have seen, the limitations also very clearly, that it can come in the way of efficient ways of handling things. As you have seen very clearly that historically the organizations have evolved over a period of time. I have mentioned to you very quickly, we started the military or a simple line kind of an organization, which also led to this kind of a functional kind of an organization. Then in the 70s, we very clearly were identifying the line and staff kind of an organization, which had different combinations, but all of these things emerged around the principle of departmentation. So, definitely following the methods of departmentation would help identifying and evolving the organizational chart. So, once you have the organizational chart, then you can understand what departments are required, what departments are not required, because it gives you an overall graphical representation of the organizational realities. But organizational charts not the beginning or by end in itself. So, this is essentially enabling one to look at what is to be done. And as we go along in the next session, very clearly we will try and understand what is coordination, how to do this, what is the concept, and also the various principles of effective coordination, and features, aims and characteristics, and what kind of problems, what kind of issues will come as a part of the effective coordination.